today's class is going to be a very interesting, important, special class on how to say goodbye. Our role model for tonight's lesson is going to be the esteemed Moshe Rabbeinu. Hello, Morty. Hello, Sherry. Hello, Randy. Hello to those who are watching on the website, to Esther, to Gail, everyone else. Tonight we are going to be talking about Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, shortly before he is going to pass away. He knows he's going to die. He knows that his end is near. God has told him so clearly, and as we already discussed last week, God has already given him the final instructions for preparation for the day on which he will no longer be alive. And this, the Torah reading we're going to read today, which is the beginning, the first verses of the book of Devarim, of Devarim, are his goodbye to the Jewish people. Before I go further, let me just say that tonight's class, as always, is Le'ilei Nishmas, an elevation of the soul of Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yosef and Tzipora bat Yehoshua, social elevation in Gan Eden. I also want to say a special refuah shlema for Yehuda's Bela bas Hendel Chana, who needs a big, big healing, and everyone else needs healing. Good evening, Perry, and everyone else that's watching. You all heard of Moshe Rabbeinu. You all know Moses. He is what we would call a teacher par excellence. He is the best teacher, the best motivator, the best role model that any Jew could ask for. And so Moshe Rabbeinu knows he's about to pass away. And Moshe Rabbeinu gathers together the Jewish people, and he begins in the beginning of Chumash Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, which is the book that we start reading on this week's Torah lesson, this week's Parsha. He begins his farewell speech to the Jewish people. Now, I have to warn you that this farewell speech to the Jewish people is a farewell speech that takes 37 days. 37 days. 37 days of him saying goodbye. It's a long time to say goodbye. It's a very long goodbye speech. It spans several Torah readings, several portions, parshas, meaning this week's parsha and next week's parsha, the parsha after that, and after that, and after that, Devarim, Eschan, and Ekev. The whole Chumash Devarim is basically the farewell speech of Moshe Rabbeinu in different sections. It wasn't all in one shot. But the next 2.5 weeks to 3.5 weeks is all one section. By the way, some of the most beautiful verses in all of the Torah, in my opinion, are in this week and next week and the week after the Torah. Words of farewell, the last will and testament of Moshe Rabbeinu. What we're going to read today together is just going to be the opening of this farewell speech. The framing. I've been very big into talking about framing lately. The framing, every good speaker knows how you set the stage, or any good caterer knows, any good balabast, any lady that's watching and likes to host guests. When you go into a restaurant, the meal is important, but how you set the table, the cutlery, the flowers, that already is very valuable in setting the tone of what kind of meal to expect. And so, I'm going to try to change this a second. So we're going to read today. Is the last will, the way that Moshe sets the stage, the way he sets the cutlery for his last farewell speech to the Jewish people. And we're going to read the opening verse. Let me just first tell you the date. The date of this is Rosh Chodesh Shvat, the first day of the month of Shvat. Moshe would pass away on Zayin Adar, the 7th of Adar, 37 days later. So Moshe gathers together all the Jews. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to read with you together just the first 2 verses. We'll see them before I do that. Just like the first 2 verses, we're going to unpack, because there's really a lot to unpack in this, okay? So let me first close it to open the wrong thing. And let me click share screen. And we're going to read it together. These are the words of opening Deuteronomy chapter 1, okay? Verse number 1. These are the words, this verse, these are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel on that side of the Jordan in the desert, in the plain opposite the Red Sea, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Chatzerot and Dizahav. Okay? This verse, I am going to unpack every word of the verse. So I read it fairly quickly, And on a simplistic level, it seems to be saying a location where Moses is when he speaks to the Jews. But let's read it again carefully. Pay attention to the words, and then I'll take off the screen and I'll share with you each and every word the meaning. Where is Moshe speaking these words? He's on that side. Excuse me. He's on that side of the Jordan. So that's number one. Remember, he's on that side of the Jordan. Number two, he's in the desert. Whoopsies. Let's try and do this carefully. He's in the desert. Number three, he is in the plain opposite the Red Sea. Number four, he's between Paran. Number five, and Tophel, and Lavan, and Chatzeros, and Dizahab. That's a pretty elaborate, pretty elaborate. Let me go a little further, and then we'll explain. It is 11 days journey from Chorev by way of Nanseir to Kadesh Barnea. That's what he tells the Jews. We are an 11-day journey from Chorev. Chorev, I'll tell you now, is Mount Sinai. By way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. Again, I promise to explain all of this. It came to pass in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first of the month, meaning the 11th month is the month of Shvat, on the first of the month, which is Rosh Chodesh, and Moses spoke to the children of Israel according to all that Lord had commanded him regarding them, after he had smitten Sichon, the king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Cheshbon, and after he had killed Og, the king of Bashan, who dwelt in Ashtaroth and Edrei. On that side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses commenced and explained the law, saying, okay, that's enough. Okay, that is a lot that has to be explained in what I just said, okay? So let's start again from the beginning. You saw the verse inside. Moshe begins his farewell speech to the Jewish people by seemingly describing a geographical location. However, the geographical location that he describes to them is impossible. Let's start from the beginning. He says we are on the eastern side of the Jordan River. Now that is true. If you've been following along the Torah reading for the last few weeks, you know that the Jewish people have traveled around trying to get to the land of Israel, and they had to go through the land of the Ammonim and the Moabites, and he conquered, as we just read, he conquered the war against Sichon and against Og, who was the king of Cheshbon. He conquered all these wars. Good evening. A lot of people saying good evening to me. Good evening to all of you as well. Shalom to you all. So we know that geographically, the Jewish people are camped on the east side of the Jordan River. By the way, just so you know what I'm talking about, when we talk about the West Bank of Israel, which is what we really call parts of, it's not the West Bank, it's part of Israel. But the West Bank of Israel is the west side of the Jordan River. So it's on the Israel side of the Jordan River, but the west side of the Jordan River, so it's called the West Bank. But it's the eastern end of Israel. So if you were to cross the Jordan River, which is now what we would call Jordan, that's where the Jews are camped. So they are indeed on the east side of the Jordan River, and that is a correct geographical location of where the Jews are when Moshe speaks to them before his death. And in fact, as we read in last week's Torah reading, last week, this is where God told Moshe, 2 weeks ago, where God tells Moshe to go up on the mountain. He can overlook the Jordan River. He can see the land of Israel, but he cannot cross into the land. So the opening words of the verse are correct. They are on the east side of the Jordan River. But from there, the verse makes no sense. I'm not going to go back and forth to the screen. You saw the verse already. What's the next thing that Moshe says in describing where they are? In the desert. No, I'll share just for 1 second, just so you can see what I'm saying. Just so you can see for 1 second what I'm saying. Share a screen. I want to make sure that you're following me. I want you to understand how this doesn't make sense unless you understand this. These are the words which Moshe spoke to all of Israel on that side of the Jordan in the desert. Okay? On that side of the Jordan in the desert. But they're not in the desert. They're on the east side of the Jordan River. The desert is on the south of Israel. If you know any geographical awareness of the land of Israel, where is the Sinai Desert? South of Israel. Where is the Jordan River? On the west bank of Israel. They're not anywhere near each other. So how could Moshe say that you're on the east, that you're on the east side of the Jordan River in the desert? They're not the same place. And then he goes on. I'll show you a few more things. And he also says you're in Lavon and Chatzeros and Dizav and Paran and Tofel, all those places. The rabbis in the Gemara tell us that some of those places don't even exist, that they were searched. And in the entire Torah, nowhere do we find a place called Paran. Nowhere do we find a place called Tofel. So these places are not even real places. So what does Moshe say? So let me explain to you, my dear friends, that the verse of Moshe over here is a rebuke of Moshe to the Jewish people. Moshe is beginning his farewell speech to the Jews by rebuking them. He's rebuking them. But Moshe does not want to rebuke them openly. He wants to hide, he wants to cloak his rebuke of the Jews in metaphorical language. And therefore, every one of the places that Moshe seemingly describes, each and every one of those places are actually not real places. Each and every one of those places are actually allegories or metaphors for a different sin that the Jewish people committed because of their complaining, because of the lack of faith in God, because of the lack of trust, etc. And so Moshe gathered all the Jews together, as the verses that Moshe spoke to all of Israel. He spoke to all of Israel. Yeah? I'm not going to get my glasses on it. We'll get rid of the glare. Oh, much better. So Moshe spoke to all of Israel, gathered together every single Jew. So no one should say that if I would have been there, I would have answered Moshe as follows. And he gathered them all together and said, I'm going to share with you words of rebuke. The first rebuke is in the desert. In the desert. What sin did the Jews do in the desert that Moshe had to rebuke them for? That's a fairly easy one. Every time, first of all, there were 10 times in the desert that they complained to God. But the most famous time is when they complained that they had no food. And they complained to Moshe and said, we have no bread to eat. And then they complained, we have no water to drink. And then Dust and Aviram went and they hid the bread out of the field that they should go pretend like they should go find it, as if the man had fallen on Shabbos. If you remember the story, if you don't remember, it's fine. He hid the bread on Shabbos, Dust and Aviram, because Moshe said that no bread will come on Shabbos. He'll get a double portion on Friday. So he hides it on Shabbos, etc. Etc. I should say one thing. What I'm going to share with you tonight, by the way, I should have said this in the beginning. What I'm going to share with you tonight about how Moshe rebukes the Jewish people is going to be directly relevant for me and you as life lessons and tips on how we could rebuke and criticize other people as well. So stay tuned. I should have said that in the beginning. So the first most famous, and you're going to see how these are all connected. So the first most important or most famous rebuke is the desert. Over and over again, the Jews complained against God, 10 times actually, where they complained against God in the desert. The next geographical location is actually not it is a geographical location when he's actually reminding them of a sin which they did in this place, is the sin that happened in the plains of Moab. The next place that Moshe says to the Jewish people where they were, I'll share my screen so you can see what I'm talking about. After he rebukes them for their complaining in the desert, he reminds them of the sin that they did in the plain opposite the Red Sea. What's the plain? In Hebrew, the plain is the Arava. Let's go to the Hebrew. Be'ever Hayarden, by Midbar, in the desert. It's better in the Hebrew, by the way, by Midbar, is the desert. Ba'arava in the plains. Mel Suf means opposite the Sea of Reeds. So let's stop sharing our screen. I'm going to describe to you the sin of the Arava, the plains. I'm going to tell you about the sin of the Yam Suf. I'm going to tell you about the rebuke of Paran. I'm going to tell you about the rebuke of Tofel. I'm going to tell you about the rebuke of the Lavan. I'm going to tell you about the rebuke of Chatzeros and of Dizaham. Okay? So now you see I'm showing you because I want you to understand that what I'm telling you is all in the verse. Each and every word of this opening verse is a hidden metaphor and a hidden message to the Jews of another sin for which they need to repent. So, what's the sin that happened in the Arava? The plain is the plains of Moab. The plains of Moab is the sin that just happened 2 weeks ago, where the Jewish people sinned with the daughters of Midian. The Torah tells us that where did the Jewish people sin with the daughters of Moab? In the plains of Moab. In the Arvos Moab is what it's called. He then rebukes them for their doubt that God would save them when they were opposite the Yam Suf, opposite the Sea of Reeds. It says that they lost faith before they were saved. If you remember the story of the Jewish people, when they came to the Sea of Reeds, they started to complain. They said that God won't let us die. And there were 4 camps of Jews. And one camp of Jews says, let's commit suicide. And one camp of Jews says, let's surrender, go back to Egypt as slaves. And one camp of Jews says, let's fight to our death. And one camp of Jews says, let's pray. But many of them gave up hope. And the ones that said, let's die, commit suicide. They said, why did you take us out of Egypt, where we were at least alive as slaves? Now we're going to be captured and be tortured for running away. Better to die and commit suicide than to be taken back as prisoners. And they completely lost faith in God. That was a sin. Not only did they sin before the splitting of the sea, you can understand, before the splitting of the sea, they hadn't seen any miracles. So if they hadn't seen any miracles, we understand why they lost faith in God and why they complained. So why did you take us out of Egypt to be recaptured by the Egyptians as slaves? But after the miracle, guess what happened? There's a verse in Tehillim that says, Vayamru al Yam b'Yam Suf, which means that they rebelled against God at the Yam Suf. You know how they rebelled against God at the splitting of the sea? It says that when the Jews came out of the sea and they didn't see the Egyptians, you would think, history is 2020, you would think the Jews say, thank you, Lord, you saved my life. Hodu Hashem, thank you, Hashem. Instead, you know what the Jews did? They said, oh my gosh, just like we went through the sea on one side and came out of the other side, it could be that the Egyptians also went through the sea and came out on the different side of the sea. But really, they're still alive. And really, they're still going to catch us. And therefore, because they're going to catch us, our lives are still in danger. And because even after experiencing the miracle of the splitting of the sea, they still doubted in the completion of the miracle that God had done, God was forced to do another miracle. And God made the sea spit up the dead bodies of the Egyptians and their horses and their chariots and all of their cavalry, etc., in order that only when it says in the verse that the Jews saw on the shores of the ocean the dead Egyptians, then they began to sing the praises of God. Then it says that they believed in God and in Moshe's servant. So even at the splitting of the sea, Moshe is reminding the Jewish people before his death that you guys sinned. You lost faith. You were doubting in Hashem's abilities to save you, even after you experienced the miracles of the splitting of the sea. Let's continue. The next words in the verse was in Paran. There's a desert called Paran. You know where the desert of Paran is? It's the northernmost part of the Sinai Desert. Paran was the place where the spies were sent to go and scout out the land of Israel 39 years earlier. Paran was the place where the Jewish people where the Jewish people were camped at the edge of the entrance to Israel when the spies came back from Israel with their very negative, dismal report, and they said, we have looked into the land, and the land is too great, and we will not capture it. And the main people are giants, and the cities are fortified. And that night all the Jews sat down and began to cry, and they said, we're never going to enter the land. And again they said, why did you take us out of Egypt to be killed by the people living in the lands of Canaan? That night was the night of Tisha B'Av. And God said, since you cried for no reason, I will give you a reason to cry. But that's not tonight's class. The point is that when Moshe in the verse says that they cried like Paran, he's reminding them, sorry, when he said, I'm giving you this rebuke at Paran, he's hinting to them of the fact that they had complained against God and lost all faith in God when the story of the spies came out with negative reports. The next words in the verse are Ubein Lavan. Lavan is not a place. There's no place called Lavan. Lavan is a hint, it's a metaphor for the white. Lavan means white. Lavan is a metaphor for the white, delicious the manna, the bread from heaven that God had given the Jews to eat, which was described in the Torah as white and pure like coriander seed. The manna, the bread from heaven, was white. And the Jewish people complained about the white lavan, the white manna, the white bread. The next time they complained, by the way, what did the Jews complain about the bread? Why did the Jews complain about the bread? Imagine if God gave you bread from the heaven. Would you complain? Imagine you didn't have to work for a living. Every morning, you went outside your tent or outside your beautiful home. You walked down the driveway, and instead of getting the mail, you went to get bread from heaven. Would that be so terrible? So why did the Jews complain? Why did they complain against God when they had the bread? It's not talking about when they complained when they were hungry. That's already in the desert they complained. The reason why the Jews complained is because they never had any leftovers. They never had any bread left over for the next day. And therefore, it says in the Talmud, you can't compare someone that has bread in his basket to someone that does not have bread in his basket. Meaning, when you have bread in your basket, when you have money in the bank, so even though maybe right now you're feeling not so rich, but if you have bread, if you have money in the bank, there's a certain sense of confidence and comfort, knowing that I have money. You know you're going to be okay. However, when you don't have money in the bank, even if you have food today, you're not going to bed hungry, but your savings are depleted. You don't have a job. I mean, I'm speaking to many people right now. There's a tremendous fear, a tremendous anxiety that comes out of not knowing what tomorrow will bring. And so just not knowing what they would do about food for tomorrow, that alone already made them complain and said that we have no bread. Every morning we need to go and collect that day's bread. But when we go to sleep at night, the pantry is empty. When we go to sleep at night, there's no food in the pantry. There's no rainy fund for a rainy day. There's no emergency fund. And that takes a lot of faith to be able to survive and be so trusting in God to go to sleep with no food in the house and say, I'll wake up in the morning and God will give me more food tomorrow. But the Jews lacked that faith, and the Jews complained. And Moshe is reminding them of their complaint. Okay? He then rebukes them for having joined Korach's rebellion, which took place after they had journeyed from Chatzeros to Risma. So when he says, Ben Chatzeros, the next place is a hint. Chatzeros is a place where Korach rebelled against Moshe. Again, very briefly, if you remember the story of Korach, Korach led a revolution against Moshe. He said that Moshe is taking too much control for himself. There's nepotism. He made his brother Aaron the high priest. He made his nephew Elitzaphan the leader of the tribe of Levi. All the Jews are holy. Why is Moshe taking leadership for himself? Whole story, how Korach led a revolution against Moshe. That happened when the Jews left Chatzeros. And the last place mentioned in the verse is Di Zahav. Di Zahav, there's no place called Di Zahav. But Zahav is gold. What sin did the Jews do with gold? Of course, you all know the answer. What sin did the Jews do with gold? Golden calf. And this is the opening verse that Moshe says. But he's not done, Moshe. He continues the next verse. And he says, we are an 11-day journey from Mount Chorev. Mount Chorev is also known as Mount Sinai. And we travel by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea, if you remember the verse. Meaning, what's Moshe saying? Really, to get to Israel from the Mount Sinai should have been an 11-day journey. And yet, God did this 11-day journey in just 3 days. Just very quickly, I'll go through the math for you. And if you follow the number, the dates, great. If not, don't worry about it. The Jews left the Sinai desert on the 20th of Iyar. They got the Torah on the 6th day of Shivan. They were there 40 days later. Moshe came down the mountain. They sinned with the golden calf. 40 days later, etc. They sinned with the golden calf. Moshe goes up till Yom Kippur gets forgiveness. They build the Mishkan till Rosh Chodesh Nisan. They end up inaugurating a whole month there. Then they have the whole story where they wait the 30 days at Kibbutz Taiva, and then they start to travel on the 20th of Iyar. Sorry, one day they travel on the 20th of Iyar. They come to Kivrot HaTa'ava, which is where they had the sin with the desire for the meat. And from there, it was one day to Risma. And then from there, it was one day to Kadesh Barnea. So even though it was an 11-day journey, God did a miracle, and in 3 days, they traveled, which should have done 11 days. Why did God do that? Because God was so eager to bring the Jewish people into Israel, he was rushing them. He said, please, I can't wait to give you the promised land. I can't wait to give you the land I promised to your forefathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And instead of the Jews saying, thank God we got there faster, thank God, instead of, I must tell you, the pleasure I have, I'll tell you a secret now. When I'm going somewhere, especially when I'm late like today, and there's a Google map says your destination, your arrival is 7:35. And you get there a few minutes before Google Maps tells you you're going to get there. You beat Google? For me, maybe it's because I'm whatever. If you beat Google, it's a geschmack. It's like, not that I speed, chas v'shalom. God forbid I would ever drive fast. But if somehow you drove faster than Google estimated that you would drive, and you get there earlier than the time, it's a great joy. So the Jews, instead of being happy and saying, thank God, said, normally this journey took 11 days. And we got there only in 3 days. Instead, the Jews complained. And therefore, God is upset that they complained about that too. They complained about the speed of the journey. They complained about the speed of the journey. Shalom Fern. It's such a sad story. I read these verses, and you're reminded how in the 40-year journey of the Jews, time and time again, they sinned. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. Anyway, this is where the Jewish people are camped over there by the Jordan River. I want to go back and show you the screen one more time. I want to read with you one more verse that we already read, but I want to repeat it because it's important. And then I'm going to share with you some very valuable life lessons on how we can rebuke. Okay? The next message we can see, because all of this is Moshe rebuking the Jews, but look at the timing. Look at the timing. Let me share my screen so you can read the text. Here we go. Oops, did I share my screen now? Let's do that again. Here we go. So here, I'm not going to repeat it. Here, verse number 1, they're on the Jordan, in the desert we explained, in the plain where they sin with the girls of Moab, opposite the Red Sea when they complained when they didn't see the dead Egyptians, between Paran, which is where they sinned with the spies, between Tophel is where they complained against God, Lavan's about the man, Chatzeros is where Korach was, and these is the gold of the golden calf. An 11-day journey from Chorev, with 11-day journey took them only 3 days, and yet they still complained. Here's what I want to show you. Came to pass here's what I want to show you. After he had smitten Sichon, king of Amorites, and after he had killed Og. So the Jews are on a high. the Jews have destroyed all of their enemies. On that side of the Jordan is where Moshe begins to speak to the Jewish people. And here's where he tells them all the stories that happened to them, but we're not going to go into them now. Instead, I want to point out to you something very important about the timing of this rebuke to Moshe. Why does Moshe wait 40 years to rebuke the Jewish people? Why is Moshe waiting 40 years? Seemingly, Moshe should have rebuked the Jews. If Moshe wants to rebuke them, he had 40 years in which to rebuke them. And yet he does not rebuke them. Why does he not rebuke them? So Rashi tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu specifically was waiting until the day that he was to die. Or not the day, I was saying, until shortly before his death. He was waiting until shortly before his death. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu learned from Jacob, from Yaakov Avinu. Remember Yaakov Avinu, Jacob? Jacob also had a lot of words of rebuke he wanted to say to his kids, and yet Jacob holds it in. He holds it in. When I say you close your lips and throw away the key, he didn't throw away the key. He held the key and said, I'm going to wait for the right opportunity in which to rebuke my children. And in fact, the Torah tells us the first person to get sick before they die was Jacob. I'm sure you are familiar with the custom that when a person sneezes, hachu, we say zu gesund, or gesundheit, which is Yiddish for gesundheit means you should be healthy. Zu gesund means to health, which is an exact translation of the Hebrew labriut. Labriut is Hebrew for to health, or in Spanish to say salud. There's many, many different words that all mean the exact same thing. We hear someone sneezing, we say, you should be healthy. God bless you. Why God bless you? Some even have the custom when they sneeze, they pull the right earlobe and they quote a verse, Hashem, that, oh God, I hope to you for my salvation. Why do we give a blessing for health when a person sneezes? So the Talmud tells us that originally man did not get sick before he died. How did man die? He would sneeze. And just like God breathed our nostrils into our, breathed our soul into our nostrils, the Torah tells us in Genesis, when God created Adam, it says he formed him out of dirt. When he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, so the soul came in through our nose. So too, when a person whose time was ready to go back to heaven, when it was time for God to take the soul and the body should expire, the person would sneeze, the soul would leave through the nose, and the person would die. Still true till today. I have been with people as they died, and you hear something like, you hear a breath. You can hear it. Not always, I should be honest, not always have I heard it, but usually you can hear when someone dies. I've been both. I've been in situations where we heard the breath. I've been in situations where we didn't hear. It's only from the monitor. But that's the idea. Yaakov Avinu, Jacob prays to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and says, God, please allow me to get sick before I die, so I should feel that my end is coming, so I can gather my children, and I can share with them words of rebuke before I die. And sure enough, we find that before Jacob passes away, he gathers all of his children, and each and every one is given their own farewell message, their own goodbye. And so too, Moshe Rabbeinu learns from Yaakov, from Jacob, his father, and he waits to rebuke them only before he's going to pass away. In addition, he knows what it says in Sifri. In Sifri it says that one should not reprimand a person except shortly before one's death. Why? So when your friend sees you, he won't be embarrassed from you. Imagine I rebuke you, and now I'm going to come and see you the next day. You'll be a little ashamed. You just called me out yesterday for my sins that I did wrong, for that my mistakes that I made. In addition, the second reason, you shouldn't have to rebuke over and over again. And therefore, for these reasons, we find that Joshua, Yehoshua, the successor of Moshe Rabbeinu, he learned from his teacher, and he too does not rebuke the Jewish people until shortly before his death. And so too in the book of Shmuel, the book of Samuel, also that Samuel only rebukes the people before he dies. And so too, David HaMelech, King David, only rebukes his son Solomon, only shortly before his death. And so from here we see that a person should wait, not just the second you see someone doing something wrong, bam, here's my rebuke. Hold it. Save it for the right time. Save it for a time when the person is being rebuked will not be embarrassed to see your face again. Save it for a time when you think he's going to listen to you. Save it for a time that you don't have to repeat the rebuke over and over again. Time it. Be careful when you say it. In addition, the rabbis tell us, I just made sure to read to you verse number 4, that when did Moshe give the rebuke to the Jewish people? Only after he had already killed Sichon, the king of the Amorites, and only after he had killed Og, the king of Bashan. Meaning, the Jews were in some kind of very high, the morale of the Jews was in a good place. And Moshe had earned his right, so to say, to rebuke the Jews. So Moshe had just won a number of victories. So the Jews were obviously feeling very good about Moshe. And they were feeling good about themselves. So they were receptive to the message of Moshe and to the messenger. They were receptive to Moshe rebuking them, because Moshe just saved them from several wars. They were receptive to the message because they were in a feeling of security, a general rule of life. When people are feeling secure about themselves, they can handle criticism. When a person's feeling insecure, they can't handle criticism. And therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu waits until the Jewish people are near the time before he passes away, where they won't be embarrassed by him. And number 2, he waits until they're in a good mood, where they're feeling secure, where they're feeling happy, where they're feeling trusting in Moshe Rabbeinu. And now that Moshe has proved that he's capable of conquering their enemies, and the Israelites can't accuse him of rebuking him because of his own failures, because Moshe has led them faithfully and securely. Now Moshe says, let me remind you, my dear Jews, of all the mistakes that you've made. Let me remind you of all of the mess-ups that you've done. And now let's get to the life lessons. I taught you this verse in great depth. But let's talk for us. I'm going to go back to the verse. But let me first set the stage for what we're going to end this class with. I'm going to actually end with a very, very beautiful story. If you're watching right now, I want to tell you that I have a beautiful story to share with you. Beautiful. So don't go away. But we live in cancel culture. Lately, I've been into talking about current events. People enjoy it. So let's talk about cancel culture. Let's talk about people critiquing other people. Let's talk about the environment of today, where people almost feel like it's their moral obligation to be the Facebook police, to be the ones to hold the world accountable for what you think or what they think are the wrongs, the prejudice, the racism, the hate, the lack of sensitivity for whatever comment or meme or picture you so innocently posted on Facebook. And then I read a fascinating article about the braying hyenas of Facebook, waiting to come and pounce. We live in an unbelievably judgmental, critical culture. And I discussed last week about judgment. So now I want to take the idea a step further. Last week I said you shouldn't judge others, and that's true. I don't take back anything that I said. But there is a concept in Judaism of rebuking somebody that does something wrong. Moshe Rabbeinu rebukes the Jews for their sins. Jacob rebukes the Jews, his children, for their sins. In fact, there is a mitzvah in the Torah, a clear black and white verse in the book of Vayikra that says, Hocheach es amisecha, which means you shall surely rebuke your friend. So it doesn't say you shall rebuke your friend. You shall surely rebuke your friend. The word in Hebrew is hochacha, and the verse says hocheach tochiach as amisecha. But when you have twice the same word, it means you shall surely. Like v'haya im shamoa tishma'u el mitzvot. Saying this from every day. You will surely listen to my commandments. So there is a absolutely unequivocal, clear biblical commandment to rebuke somebody that you see doing something wrong. So last week I said not to judge, but there's a mitzvah to rebuke. Sometimes when we see someone posting something inappropriate, sometimes when we see someone behaving in an insensitive manner, in a way that's not befitting of them, in a way that's not correct, we have an obligation to rebuke them. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. But yet, there are conditions. There are parameters. There are techniques in how to effectively rebuke somebody. There's no mitzvah in the Torah that, I shouldn't say no. Many mitzvahs in the Torah are only in certain times, only under certain conditions, only under certain requirements do they happen. The mitzvah of rebuking has many requirements. First of all, it says you shall surely rebuke your friend. And in fact, yesterday's daily Rambam, every day I learn a section of the Rambam. We talked about last Thursday night with my brother-in-law, Rabbi Janowski. There's a daily study of Rambam that many people study. Yesterday's daily Rambam talked about rebuking a friend. And the Rambam specifically and deliberately repeats the word many times when you rebuke chavero, your friend. Meaning, in order to rebuke somebody, they must first be your friend. It cannot be a random stranger on Facebook that you don't know who they are. It can't be a random stranger on Twitter or on any other parlor or any other social media site. It can't even be someone that happens to go to the same shul as you. They need to be your friend. First of all, as the Alter Rebbe explained in chapter 32 of Tanya, they have to be someone who is on the same level of you as you in their spiritual observance. So they need to be holding on your level. They need to be your friend, meaning they need to be your equal. They need to be someone that you relate to on a peer-to-peer level. They need to be someone who's your friend, meaning that you care about them. You have their best interest at heart, and they know that you have their best interest at heart. When you rebuke someone that doesn't feel that you have their best interests at heart, you know what usually happens? What usually happens is they don't listen to the rebuke. They become defensive. They become perhaps argumentative. They become very, very, what's what I'm looking for? You know what I'm saying. They become very, very passive aggressive, or maybe even straight open aggressive. For sure, passive aggressive. In general, none of us are good at taking rebuke. No human being is good at taking rebuke, a natural sense. But obviously, it's much easier to take rebuke from someone that cares about you. It's easier to take rebuke from someone that loves you. It's easier to take rebuke from your mother than it is from some random stranger. And so therefore, only when someone is your friend, and only when you know someone cares about you, can you rebuke them. I want to go back to Moshe Rabbeinu. Look at Moshe Rabbeinu. When did he rebuke the Jews? Only after he won all those wars. Only after Moshe Rabbeinu had gone to war and he had single-handedly killed Sichon, he killed Og, where he took an axe and he chopped off the foot. Og was a giant. And Moshe Rabbeinu took an axe that was 10 feet tall. He jumped 10 feet in the air and he chopped off his leg and he fell on the floor, and then he came and he cut off his head. So Moshe risked his life to fight this giant Og. You risked your life to save me. You went and you fought battle for me. Now I know that you care about me. Now I'm willing to listen to what you have to say. It's so important. I see people who are so quick to rebuke others. They want me. I get people complaining, how come you don't rebuke that person for what he does? I don't feel like I love him enough. Or I don't feel that that person, I love him enough. I don't feel that that person feels that the rebuke would come from love. Does the rebuke come because my ego is feeling hurt that they talked in the synagogue, that they talked? I remember there was someone who always get upset at me. I didn't scream at people for, a guy would walk during my sermon, and this man was upset, I should kick him out of shul. He didn't respect the rabbi. He didn't respect the rabbi, the rabbi should kick him out of shul. Why are we rebuking? Is the rebuke because I love you and I care about you and I want to help you get better? Or is there a rebuke because I want to rebuke you? Is there a rebuke because you're my friend? Or is there a rebuke because I myself am suffering from insecurities? I myself have my own emotional problems, my own traumas, my own whatever that I need to deal with. So instead of me dealing with my own problems, I'm going to vent them out on you. Let's go back to the verse. I want to ask you a question. I saw a beautiful thought today. Do you know that the verse says that Moshe Rabbeinu, the verse says, Hocheach tochiach amisecha. You shall surely rebuke your friend. Do you know what the Talmud above Metzia says on that verse? That you shall surely rebuke your friend. The fact that the Torah repeats the word Hocheach tochiach twice is to tell you that even if you need to rebuke a person many times, you rebuke him. So our Rashi that I just told you earlier today says that why did Moshe wait to rebuke the Jewish people? Because he didn't want to have to rebuke them over and over. So in order to avoid rebuking them many times, he waited till his death so he wouldn't have to repeat the rebuke about their lack of faith in God. What would be wrong if he repeated his rebuke? The Torah clearly says that you should rebuke a person many times. It's a good question. So that's our beautiful answer today. Beautiful answer. There's rebuking a sin and there's rebuking a person. Sometimes a person does something wrong. You need to correct the behavior. If you're responsible for that person's behavior, or if you're the friend of that person, then you are entitled and you are obligated, says the Talmud. You have an obligation to be a friend. A true friend, by the way, is not afraid to. See, some people don't rebuke because they're afraid that you'll make the person upset at you, and you don't want to make him upset. But if you truly, truly care about the other person, you're going to try and help them fix their negative actions. In that case, you need to rebuke them again and again. You need to keep on trying to help them change their negative behavior. But that's a rebuke on behavior, not on actions. Then there's another kind of rebuke. A rebuke on character. A rebuke of personality. A rebuke not where I'm criticizing something specifically you've done, but where I'm trying to help you become a better person. Trying to help change the character flaw or the personality trait that allowed you to behave in a certain negative way. When Moshe rebukes the Jewish people, are they still guilty of the sin of complaining? No. Almost all the sins that Moshe reminds the Jews of, the golden calf, complaining about the white bread, about the spies, about the sins of the Yam Suf, where they complained that they didn't believe in God in the Red Sea, all the sins of the desert, like we don't have food, and then we don't have water to drink. All those happened 39 years earlier. This generation is a new generation. The people Moshe is speaking to before the Jews enter the land of Israel are a new generation. They're new people. They have not committed the actual complaints and the actual sins for which Moshe is rebuking them. So why is he rebuking them? Here a beautiful thought. Moshe is not rebuking a behavior, an action. Moshe is rebuking a character trait. He's rebuking a tendency of Jews to complain. You ever met a Jew that likes to complain? It's not. It's, you know the famous joke about the Jew sitting on the train. Oh, am I thirsty? Oh, I'm so thirsty. I'm so thirsty. He won't stop moaning and groaning how thirsty he is. So finally, this guy sitting next to him on the train can't handle it anymore. He says, here's a bottle of water I have. I'm going to give you my bottle of water so you can save yourself from dying of thirst. Man thanks and takes the bottle, drinks the whole water. Takes a deep breath. And he goes, Oi, oi, was I so thirsty? Oi, was I so thirsty? It's not about the fact that I'm thirsty. I have water to drink. Now I'll complain that I was thirsty. There are some people that love to complain for the sake of complaining. If it's not the food, it's the waiter. If it's not the waiter, it's the lighting. If it's not the lighting, it's not the air conditioning, it's too cold. If it's not the air conditioning, the people at the table next to them are too noisy. It's not this specific issue. They always find what to complain about. Moshe Rabbeinu here is not criticizing a behavior. Hence, Moshe doesn't explicitly say to them, you did this wrong, you sinned with the golden calf, because he's not rebuking them for the golden calf. He's not rebuking them for lacking faith in God that he killed the Egyptian of the Red Sea, Sea of Reeds. He's not criticizing them for the fact they complained about the white bread or about the sin of the spies or the sin of Korach. The people that sin with Korach are dead. The sin of Korach is over. But the personality, the character trait that allowed that sin of the spies or of Korach to happen, it could happen again. So therefore, Moshe knows before I die, before I allow you to go into Israel, we're going to face new challenges, new reasons to complain. I want to try and help you change your character. But if you want to change someone's character, you have to find a nice way to say it. You have to find a way of saying it that you don't put up the defense mechanism, the shield, the block of the other person. If you come to a person and say, you did a golden calf, you sinned and you didn't believe in God, you lost faith in the spies. The person goes like this. Moshe Rabbeinu wants to help them. But Moshe Rabbeinu is a teacher par excellence. And therefore Moshe Rabbeinu opens with allegory. He hints, he alludes, he gives them ideas. Because he knows if I'm going to come and say, you did X, Y, Z, the speech is over. I once read a teacher said that giving criticism is like having a teacher, being able to criticize our students is like having a gun with only 2 bullets. A teacher needs to know, this person wrote, that a teacher only has 2 chances the whole year to effectively and successfully critique and criticize your students. A teacher can criticize. A teacher is obligated to criticize. But only twice in the year they're going to get away with it. Where the student will listen. Once you criticize more than twice, then you become a nagging OCD teacher. You've lost your effectiveness. Moshe Rabbeinu is teaching us such an important life lesson that I wish we Americans would behave. I'll tell you something. I live in the homeowners now. I live in a development, so I live in the Isles. I shouldn't say actually, but hopefully no one that lives in my development is watching. So there's actually going to be a board meeting tomorrow. There's some resolution that were suggested by the board about not allowing renters, about the common area responsibility, about allowing docks on the canals. You know, that's what happens with homeowners. There's a whole email thread that I'm on. Harsh language, harsh. Someone wrote about the abusive board even thinking to suggest such things. So I wrote something very nice, and I thanked both the person that brought it to our attention. I think the president of the board is volunteering his time. He doesn't disagree with what he wants to do, but at least he's giving his time. He cares. He's trying. Someone responded to me privately. It's very nice that you're complimenting and thanking this guy, but it's abusive behavior to do this. He must be crazy to spend lawyer money to even write this up. Who would even think of this? it's not that I disagree with what the person is saying in theory about that this clause is crazy and we shouldn't allow this clause. But the way to say it, why can't you talk, like, treat him with dignity? Make your point in a respectful manner. Moshe Rabbeinu has a point to make, but he makes it kindly. He makes it in a way that the Jews can swallow it. He makes it in a way that the Jews can absorb it without feeling defensive. And this brings me to my story. You ready for a good story? A powerful story, a Chabad story. Not a Rebbe story because it happened with the previous Rebbe, actually, but it's a Rebbe story. It's a Chabad story. If you want to understand the mentality of a Chabad shliach, of a Chabad rabbi, listen to the story I'm about to tell you. One of the first Chabad, he wasn't even an official shliach, was Rabbi Yochanan Gordon. Was the rabbi, he was a very, very famous Chabad chassid. At some point, he became the rabbi of a shul, name just slipped me now, somewhere in New Jersey, was I think in, not Morristown, where Morristown was before Morristown, in Newark, New Jersey. So going back in the 40s. So because there's a big Jewish community in the 40s in Newark. He got a job, he was hired as a rabbi in the shul. Comes, strong rabbi comes to the shul and he's teaching the people how to behave, how to conduct themselves properly and respectfully in the shul. And guess what? Some people were not so open to his critique and to his strong demeanor. And he was getting some very negative feedback from people in the community. So Rabbi Yochanan Gordon comes to a meeting with the previous Chabad Rebbe, sixth Chabad Rebbe. And he complains to the Rebbe and says, I don't know what to do. I'm trying my best. I'm trying my hardest to inspire and to uplift the people in my community. I'm trying to, guide them on the true and proper path of Judaism. And they don't want to listen to me. They don't want to hear my words. What should I do? What should I tell them? The Rebbe gave him a beautiful example. The Rebbe said, have you ever been to Auschwitz, bud? Okay, who are watching me on Facebook or on Lifelong Jewish Learning, you can comment. I think you maybe can't comment, actually. You know what a schwitzbad is? A schwitzbad is a sauna. In Yiddish, it's called a schwitzbad. A sauna. If you go into a sauna, I was in a sauna years ago. My grandparents had a condo in North Miami Beach. So in their condo, we didn't have a pool. We went to their condo to visit. They had a pool, like an outdoor pool. And then they had a sweat room, a schwitzbad, a sauna. You sit on the sauna. And if you live in Florida, you can't imagine the joy of a sauna. Well, why would you want to sweat? But it's a very enjoyable thing. You go and you sweat out all the toxins and all the stress. And then in the sauna, they hit you. It's like they take a whip or a belt of some sort, and you hit the person when it's like good and like heated up. It's a very like relaxes. It's like a massage basically. It's a massage. So the Rebbe asked, you go into a schwitzbad, you go into the sauna and you see someone is whipping someone and massaging his back and really giving his back a good massage. Yeah, it looks great, right? Everyone's like, ah. You're hitting him on the back, like, ah. You hit him on the back again. Ah, that feels good. A little lower. Hit me lower down. My lower back is still a little tense. You hit him on the lower back. Ah. Feel my back is like opening up. It feels good, right? Now imagine, says the previous episode of Yochanan Gordon, you take the same belt and you go down the sidewalk in Newark, you're walking on the street and you see this guy that you saw in the sauna yesterday, you go up to him and say, you whack him on the back. What's going to happen? He's going to turn around and punch you in the face. Call the cops on you. Well, why? Yesterday you were in the sauna and you hit him on the back. You say, more. In Yiddish, it goes better. Shmeiss me means to hit. Shmeiss, hit me. It feels good. And now you go to the same guy in the sidewalk and you give him one hit and he wants to beat you up. What's the difference? What's the difference? The Rebbe told Rabbi Yechon and Gordon, if you go and hit someone, it doesn't work. First, you have to unvarm him. You have to warm him up. You have to warm him up. And you have to lift him. You go in the sauna, there's different steps in the sauna. And the higher in the sauna you go, the hotter it is because the heat rises. So in the sauna, there's different steps. You warm him up. You bring him up a step. And then only after you already warmed him up and you already elevated him, now you hit him. Feels good. It's effective. It's therapeutic. But if you don't first warm somebody, you're just going to whack him on the back, and you come to a person who's not your friend, who you haven't first said words of love and encouragement, you haven't first shared your love and concern for him, you haven't first shown him that you're there to help him, and you come say, you did this wrong, you're a racist, you're a this, you're a that, you're a senseless, you're heartless, you're whatever. Not only with like all the words that float around Facebook today, Nazi, transphobic, homophobic, whatever. I mean, even there's someone that you can say, how dare you talk in the show? How dare you behave this way? How come you didn't do this? How come you didn't tone it down? First, you got to warm him up. First, you got to show him you love him. First, you got to put your heart there. And then the words are effective. This is the message of Moshe Rabbeinu. First, you destroy the enemies of the Jews. First, he killed Sichon and Og. He says, listen, my friends, I fought for you. I put my life on the line for you. And now before I die, let me carefully choose my words to rebuke you, not for sins that you've done, but to help fix your character for the future, to help you become better people. You should be less afraid, less doubtful of God, less trusting of God. So when you face the challenges of Israel, the challenges of the wars to conquer the land, the challenges of making a living, the challenges of farming and of planting and of working and of paying bills, you won't complain, you won't lose faith. And this is the message for us today. The goodbye message of Moshe Rabbeinu. The goodbye message of Moshe was how to say goodbye to someone, how to rebuke someone. Wait for the right opportunity. A few lessons we can take away from today. In closing and in summary. Number one, hold the words till the right time. Moshe Rabbeinu waited 39 years until the right opportunity. Number two, make sure you're doing it out of love and that you've earned their trust. That you're rebuking your friend, as the Torah says. See, Alter Rebbe discusses in Tanya. Make sure that you're on the same level, you understand each other. Make sure you're friends that have a common language, that care for each other, that feel that one cares for the other. Make sure you're rebuking not out of an agenda, because Moshe before he died had no agenda. Moshe before he died didn't have to deal with the Jews anymore. So what he was saying to them was true, not because he had an agenda against them, because he wanted to make a point against them. Message number 4 for us that we learned from Moshe Rabbeinu. Choose the words you're going to use. Sometimes I have to make a difficult phone call. I do need to rebuke someone in the show. I do need to tell someone they misbehaved. They acted out of line. They did something wrong. And, sometimes rabbis need to do this. People get into fights and they try and help them see where they made a mistake. Not always am I successful. I try. So my wife, who's very sensitive and sweet, helps me because I'm more harsh. How to use the right words, how to start with a compliment, say something nice. Don't come across as judgmental. Come across soft. Moshe Rabbeinu rebukes them, but look at the words he uses. It doesn't say you did the golden calf, you did this. He instead pretends to be talking about places that don't even exist. You were at the Zahav. There's no place, the Zahav. He's hinting to the gold of the golden calf. And lastly, the final message for us, aside from how we do it, is that make sure that you don't have to do it 20 times. Make sure that you have many, many more words of love than of rebuke, which is why we didn't go through the whole rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu. It's very, very, very long. The whole history, it's a whole history and warning to the future. The ending of the whole rebuke of Moshe Rabbeinu, the end of all the parshas, This is the beginning. We just read the opening verse of the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. Do you know how the last verses begin? Bezos habracha asher beirach Moshe b'nei Yisrael. The last parsha of the book of Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy begins. And this is the blessing that Moshe blessed all the tribes of Israel. And then there's the 12 blessings that Moshe gives each tribe individually, plus the general blessings. If you're going to rebuke somebody, make sure you give a lot of blessings as well. If you have the opportunity, we need to rebuke someone, and it's the right time, and you have the right way of saying it, and you're the right person, you're their friend. So you're the right person in the right time, in the right way, and you think to listen. Make sure that you start with positive words. Make sure you end with blessings. Make sure you do it with lots of love. Like that, hopefully our words will be successful, and we can become a more loving society where we can indeed help each other and guide each other and admonish each other and rebuke each other, but with love, in a way that will actually be effective in helping people become better, to help bring our world a better place. Good night, my friends. We live together in peace and harmony. Peace and harmony doesn't mean we don't rebuke each other. It just means that when we do it, it's done sparingly, like medicine. Medicine, you don't take a little dose. Rebuke is like medicine. You can't take too much medicine. You can't give medicine a little bit. You take half a teaspoon or whatever. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. Exactly right. And don't say too much either. Anyway, my friends, I made my point. This is very important. This is very, very important. We need to learn how to talk to each other with respect again. We've lost the ability to communicate lovingly, with compassion, and with care. When we get that back, our world will become a better place until the ultimate better place with Mashiach.